Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell with another video. Today we're going to be talking about some countries in Europe. We've been talking about Europe for a little while, and here's some specific countries we're going to talk about. First of all, United Kingdom. We have found the United Kingdom on the map before, and here's what it looks like over here. But the United Kingdom we often associate with England. But as you can see, there's more to the United Kingdom than just England. It's made up of Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. Now, we mentioned before that the United Kingdom is a constitutional monarchy. I'll write that up here. Constitutional monarchy does in fact have a king or queen, but the king or queen really doesn't have much power. It's their parliament which has all the power. And United Kingdom also has a prime minister, which kind of serves like our United States president. Now, one thing I want to tell you about the United Kingdom is there has been a conflict for 30 years or more here in between Ireland and Northern Ireland, between Catholics and Protestants. Now, we don't have many conflicts in the United States between Catholics and Protestants, and in fact most of the churches in the South are Protestant churches, but there have been even like a terrorist-like violence between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland and Northern Ireland. One thing I want to add additionally about United Kingdom on a completely different note, that William Shakespeare came from England, part of the United Kingdom, and there's quite an influence throughout the world in music from the United Kingdom. Several British songs have their national anthems, or several countries have their national anthems to British songs. Now, before you kind of snicker at that, My Country 'Tis of Thee is from a British song. And that, of course, comes from imperialism. You may remember that the British Empire was quite heavy in imperialism. The sun never set on the British Empire, you may remember. And as a result, British culture was spread throughout the world. The English language is spoken in many different places. And things such as music, even today, is heavily influenced. Popular music that we listen to today is heavily influenced by British music. You may or may not know the Beatles, a very instrumental band, came from England. On a different note, Britain is dependent upon trade. What we have is a small country with a huge population, so they just basically cannot feed themselves. So they are dependent upon trade with other countries to feed themselves. Let's go on to another country. Let's talk about Sweden. Sweden is the inside country on the Scandinavian peninsula. You can see the Scandinavian peninsula right here. It's the country on the inside. It is larger than Norway, which is to the outside. Sweden is also a constitutional monarchy. You may remember that's where you have a king or queen, but they just don't have the power. They do have an elected parliament, which has all the power. And speaking of that elected parliament, the Swedish parliament is called the Riksdag. That's the Swedish parliament. Now, Sweden has an interesting foreign policy. Their foreign policy is of armed neutrality. That means they have their own military, but they do not take sides in other nations' conflict. They do not get in any alliances. And I don't know if you remember when we talked about the Cold War, we had the big map of all the countries in red and all the countries in blue. Sweden was neither. Sweden was neutral in the entire Cold War. Sweden is known for its hydroelectric power. That's power generated from water. It has many exports. You can see that it's right there on the sea. It can get things out to the world. And for some reason, they have quite a bit of acid rain despite not having a huge population compared to other places. Now, one thing you'll find about Sweden, Sweden is very high up on Earth. Here we have the Arctic Circle. The Arctic Circle, as it goes around, cuts into northern Canada. So this has weather similar to northern Canada, even though the Gulf Stream is coming up here. There's only so much it can do for Sweden. And as a result, you don't really have that many people coming into Sweden. It has very few immigrants. So over the years, Sweden is kind of the opposite of the United States. You know, in the United States, we have so many different cultures, so many different languages, even in small areas such as Rome, Georgia. In Sweden, it's just not the case at all. Most everyone is very similar as far as culture. About 90% of the people in Sweden were born in Sweden. It's just a very similar group of people. Most everybody belongs to the same church. That's the Lutheran Church. Now, one thing about Sweden that I want to mention is the scaries. The scaries did not come from a Halloween movie, but they are small Swedish islands that are popular vacation getaways. They're little islands that are along the southern portion of Sweden that many Swedish people go to for their vacation. Let's go to France. France, you can see where it's located. We found it on the map several times before. France does not have a constitutional monarchy. No kings or queens there. Their power is between the president and the parliament. Now, there's something a little different about France's economy. Their economy has a lot of aspects of socialism. That means the government controls some of the business and industry. Government control. Now, that's not what we have here in the United States. We have a little bit of government interference, but in the U.S., we have what's called capitalism, which is kind of just the opposite of socialism. Socialism has high government control. Capitalism has high individual or people control. But it is something that France happens to have. Now, France uses more nuclear power than every country in the world. No, that doesn't mean they have nuclear weapons and are going to use them. Nuclear power means that they use nuclear fission to replace coal, gas, or oil. It's for a power source. Other things that France is known for is their wine and their food exports. You know, Britain or United Kingdom has to rely upon imports. France has a lot of exports. In fact, they probably export a lot to Britain. And France is famous for their Impressionism style of art. Let's go to another country. Why don't we go to Germany? Germany, you may remember, was divided after World War II. After World War II, it was divided into an East Germany and a West Germany, and the border was about right here, East and West. Now, after the Cold War, or after World War II, I should say, West Germany, they started bouncing back after about 20 years. They became one of the wealthiest countries in Europe, but that was not the case for Eastern Germany. You may remember that Eastern Germany was part of the Warsaw Pact. It was a puppet government of the Soviet Union here. And the Western Germany was part of NATO, which was, they weren't a puppet government of the United States, but they sided with the United States. So kind of the way things went, the NATO side had wealthier countries, and the Warsaw Pact, well, they didn't accept the Marshall Plan, so they did not have wealthier countries. So what you ended up with was a wealthy country right next to a poor country. And what happened was in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. In fact, here's the Berlin Wall on the night that it fell. You can see people crossing over it. They would be knocked down in other places. That unified Germany, which means you put a rich country with a poor country. So what you have is the Eastern Germans, which were called the Aussies, and the Western Germans, which are the Westies. They still have some tension because the Westies, I mean, you can imagine their complaints here. The German government is paying for all these Eastern Germans to get caught up with them, and all the Eastern Germans are complaining about how they had lack of employment and stuff such as that. So there's still a little bit of tension there. There happens to be a lot of, well, I'll go ahead and skip down to reunification. The government has spent billions of dollars to reunify Western and Eastern Germany. And the capital now is in Berlin. Berlin was where the wall had fallen. Musically, there's quite a musical tradition in Germany. You have Bach, you have Beethoven, that are both from Germany. Wagner was from Germany as well. And that brings us to our final country, Poland. Poland, after World War II, they were fully controlled by the Soviets. Now, we mentioned that Germany, part of Germany was controlled by Soviets, but all of Poland was a puppet government to the Soviet Union. In 1980, however, there was a labor movement led by this guy, Lech Walesa. Now, Lech Walesa was just a common electrician in the shipyards or in the working yards, and he ended up being the leader of this labor movement. They demanded an increase in pay. They demanded better working conditions. And keep in mind, this is demands made on the Polish government, which was just a puppet government of the Soviet Union. So, oh, I actually misspelled his name here. It should not have an end, even though it sounds like it should. But anyway, they demanded free elections. They demanded an end to the communist rule. So, sure enough, what oppressive governments do, they suppressed the organization and arrested Lech Walesa and thousands of others. However, economic conditions for Poland got even worse in the late 1980s. And you saw what ended up happening in Germany. So they ended up asking Lech Walesa to come back, and he was even elected president. Poland's government power is made up of a president and a parliament. They do not have a constitutional monarchy. And they suffered a lot of inflation and unemployment after they came back from communism, but they're getting back a little bit more on the rebound. A lot of Polish art and history has come from the desire to be independent. You may remember that Poland, a couple of times in history, was just wiped off the map. After World War I, it was just wiped off the map. And there was a time back in the earlier ages where it was. So a lot of their heritage is their struggle for independence. Happen to have here some questions. If you can go ahead and write these down, you can pause if you wish, but I will go ahead and read them aloud. Number 1, the UK and Sweden are this kind of government. Number 2, this country has socialism. Number 3, the Aussies and the Wessies conflict here. Number 4, the Skerries are islands off this country. Number 5, this country had a Cold War Soviet puppet government, talking about the whole country here. And number 6, Catholics and Protestants conflicted in a part of this country. I hope you learned a little bit more about Europe.